100 years ago in rural areas like North Dakota, farmers put a premium on male children because they needed more help with the chores. German-Russian immigrants Jacob and Beata Wolf had 6 children in 13 years, all of them girls. And while the girls were good at helping out on the farm, they were forced to hire a young boy to help with the chores. When they welcomed him into their fold, he was delighted. He never expected that being a part of this family would mean getting ruthlessly murdered with the rest of his new housemates. This week on Out of the Past, the Wolf family massacre. Jacob and Beata did not know each other in their country of origin. They made separate voyages to the US and didn't meet until they were both living in rural America. After their marriage in 1903, they established a farm in a North Dakota community called Turtle Lake. There they became friendly and popular with their neighbors, who, like them, were mostly immigrants from the German-speaking Volga River region. There was another farm owner with whom Mr. Wolf had a spat, but we'll get to that a little later. Beata first became pregnant in 1907 and would do so again and again until July 1919. She and Jacob welcomed 6 daughters: Bertha, Maria, Edna, Lydia, Martha, and Emma. Jacob and Beata had one of the most successful farms in the community, but as the family grew, things got more difficult. More mouths to feed meant they needed more income, and Jacob was struggling to accomplish all the chores by himself. So the family decided to hire a farm boy named Jacob Hofer, the hired boy that would suffer the same fate as his employers. On April 24th, 1920, a neighbor of the Wolf family, John Kraft, grew concerned when Jacob Wolf failed to arrive at his house to borrow a drill press they'd spoken about. It had also been at least a couple of days since anyone had seen Jacob doing his chores or any of the children playing outside. Kraft grew even more concerned when he approached their property and saw the Wolf's clothes had been out on the line during a storm. Their horses remained saddled, but nobody was riding them. John Kraft and his wife Jessie entered the house to check and see if the family was all right, and what they saw inside was more gruesome than anything they could have imagined. The house was a nightmare. Blood covered the floors in large smears that stretched from the kitchen door to the cellar door. In the cellar, they found the family matriarch, Beata Wolf. She lay at the bottom of the stairway with an enormous gunshot wound through her torso. She had obviously been shot at very close range. Beside her lay the body of her first child, 13-year-old Bertha. Bertha had several hatchet wounds on her body, but her ultimate cause of death was a gunshot wound to the face. Further back in the cellar were the bodies of Lydia and Martha. 6-year-old Lydia had hatchet and gunshot wounds very much like Bertha's. Martha, on the other hand, was not a gunshot victim. Her wounds came from the hatchet, but not from the blade. She had been bludgeoned to death with the blunt side of the instrument. Martha was only 3 years old. The body of young Jacob Hofer was also in the cellar with the women. He had died of a gunshot wound that hit his jugular and tore away half his neck. Standing in the cellar, shocked by the carnage, Mr. and Mrs. Kraft noticed something. The house wasn't quiet. They followed the faint sound of a baby's cry up to the nursery where they found the Wolf's youngest daughter, Emma, in her crib. She was starving and filthy. They were surprised, but grateful that the killer spared the baby, and they tended to her needs straight away. 3 members of the Wolf family were still missing. The Krafts made their way outside to the barn where they stumbled upon Jacob. He had 2 gunshot wounds, one from afar and the other point blank. The close shot left a gaping hole in his back. Inside the barn, they found the bodies of 2 other Wolf daughters, Maria and Edna. Both of their heads had nearly been blown off by close-range gunshot wounds. After accounting for all the members of the family, the Krafts tried to call the authorities. There was silence when they picked up the receiver. No operator. The phone lines had been cut from the outside. They took baby Emma and sped to their own home, where they were able to call the police. Word of the murders spread quickly. Citizens were afraid. How could something like this happen in their little community? People were terrified that there was a killer on the loose and looked to their elected officials to bring the culprit to justice. At the time, political rivalry had been interfering with government matters in North Dakota. Attorney General William Langer had his eyes on Governor Lynn Fraser's job, and he politicized the Wolf Massacre, accusing Fraser of being lax on crime while a killer roamed the area. Fraser refused to use any public funds on the investigation. Fraser's reluctance and Langer's impatience to see the crime solved put conflicting pressure on law enforcement to work with limited resources. The public wanted the crime solved fast, and Langer knew that doing so would win him votes. Langer also knew that he wanted to remain in the good graces of the German Russians of Turtle Lake. He had already won them over by showing respect for their culture. He was of German origin himself, so when he would visit, he spoke their language and ate their food. This is in stark contrast to the way they were treated by others in the region who wanted them to Americanize and conform. Additionally, even with the conflict of the Great War ended, anti-German prejudice ran rampant across the country, and the immigrant settlers of Turtle Lake were used to being treated poorly by other citizens. Racism was the conclusion that many came to when they tried to understand the possible motivation behind what happened to the Wolf family. It had to be an outsider. People insisted, sure that none of their neighbors could have committed such an act. But the suspect police zeroed in on was someone from their own community. When the police arrived at the Wolf home, they were tasked with looking at the aftermath to figure out exactly what happened to the family and why. Early one morning during the search, Henry Layer, who owned a farm near the Wolf estate, appeared on the scene offering to help in any way he could. At some point, when the police were losing hope of finding any shotgun shells, Henry Layer told them to look in the chicken coop. Lo and behold, there were the shells. This made law enforcement extremely suspicious. There had been a little bad blood between Layer and the Wolves. 6 months prior, one of Layer's cows had wandered too close to the wolf farm and was bitten by their dog. But could that be it? Could this man have killed 6 children and 2 adults over a simple dog bite? It seems like an unlikely motive, especially since there was no real damage to the cow. The cow was able to be sold at an animal auction a few months later. It was reported that Layer specifically asked to gaze at the Wolf family's dead bodies at the funeral, and they opened the caskets so he could. This was reported as scandalous, but newspapers didn't take into consideration that gazing on the faces of the dead was a traditional part of German-Russian culture. The funeral was attended by thousands. Some traveled 50 miles to pay their respects, an outrageously long distance to travel when only a small percentage of the population owned automobiles. And many mourners asked to look at the faces. There was a non-stop parade of people gasping and shrieking at the carnage. When police brought Layer in for questioning, they were not unbiased. They had a bee in their bonnet about him and resorted to unethical interrogation techniques to capture the man that they were sure committed the crime. Though police denied all accusations of coercion and brutality, there were reports that they treated Layer like a punching bag and told him that an angry mob waiting outside was looking to do much worse. They beat Layer relentlessly and forced him to stand for hours without a chair until he felt dizzy. One officer said that if he didn't say what they wanted, he would beat his brains out. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He offered the following account. He had visited the Wolf's farm early on the morning of the 22nd. He was there to settle things with Jacob once and for all. His cow had been harmed and Jacob was responsible for paying for the damages, considering it was his dog that bit the cow. Layer claimed that Jacob grew angry and pulled out a shotgun. Layer tried to wrestle it from Jacob's hands, but the gun ended up firing twice, killing both Beata and the farm boy, Jacob Hofer. Wolf fled into the yard, and Layer shot him in the back as he ran. One shot at long range, one close up. Police should have known by this point that the story did not match up with the forensics, but they let Layer continue. He said he moved Jacob's body to the barn, where he found 2 children hiding from the violence. Layer shot both of them, he said. Layer said he went back in the house and pulled Beata in front of the cellar door, causing her to fall down the stairs. He threw Jacob Hoffer's body down after her. He went down to cover the bodies and was met by Martha, Lydia, and Bertha, whom he promptly murdered as well. Layer told the police that he didn't know Emma was upstairs. This should have been another red flag. Would a baby have slept through gunshots? Emma should have been screaming. I'm surprised that law enforcement didn't find it suspicious. It wasn't like Layer had a problem beating a 3-year-old to death with the back of a hatchet, so why would he spare the baby? Most of Layer's story does not line up with the evidence. Let's start going through all the inconsistencies. First, the dog bite incident had occurred over 6 months prior to the massacre. Why would he wait until April to settle an issue that happened in November? Additionally, people didn't just walk into people's kitchens in this culture. When Layer arrived on the property that morning, the dogs would have alerted the wolves, including the same dog that attacked the cow. To top that off, the men weren't friends. They didn't like each other. Wolf wouldn't have invited Layer inside his home. It's very likely that Wolf would have been alerted by the dogs barking and would have gone outside to see who was there. People say it's also unlikely that Layer would have made it to the wolf farm without any neighbors witnessing his journey. But several witnesses heard gunshots around 10 a.m. This doesn't match up with Layer's account that he didn't get there until 11:30. If you're wondering why the witnesses who heard shots didn't phone the police, remember that gunshots were and are a common sound on a farm. People need to put down wounded animals, they hunt, and lots of other things. Nobody would have suspected a thing. Those same witnesses did not report hearing any dogs, which seems odd. Shouldn't we be able to tell what time the killer arrived by when the Wolf family dogs began barking? Did the perpetrator do something to subdue the dogs? Layer claimed the gun went off when he struggled with Wolf, killing his wife and the boy, Jacob. But blood spatter findings indicate that Beata was killed in the cellar. He also claimed to have killed the girls in the kitchen and then taken them to the cellar. But again, forensic evidence clearly showed that the girls were killed in the cellar while hiding. Layer claimed that Wolf fled, but a lot of people found this unlikely. He was a family man. Some say he would have stayed to fight rather than running away, leaving his little girls to be murdered by the gunman. Of course, it's difficult to say how anyone's instinct for self-preservation might or might not kick in such a terrifying situation. One other thing people take issue with is that it seems unlikely that whoever committed this crime worked without accomplices. Layer was one man who had to stop and reload his gun every once in a while. It seems like this would have given the family members a chance to gang up on him, or at the very least, run away. After Layer signed his first statement, the interrogation ended and he was escorted to the local prison. Upon arrival, he was sent for a shave and a haircut. The prison barber was shocked by the number of bruises and cuts on Layer's head. Layer was then sent to a doctor. The doctor sided with the police and refused to document his injuries, but the barber insisted they were there. The cops tried to pull a fast one on Layer when they escorted him to lockup. On the way there, they stopped and picked up another convict who was supposed to report to jail. This man was not a criminal at all, but a detective in disguise. They put them in the same cell, hoping that Layer would confess to his cellmate or brag about the murders. Layer didn't say a single incriminating word. Layer chose to enter a plea of guilty. But there was good reason for this. His interrogators had convinced him that everyone in town was after him and wanted him dead. He thought getting to prison as fast as possible was the safest thing to do. In reality, there was no angry mob. Nobody was waiting outside to kill Henry Layer. He had been fooled into making the worst possible choice. There was absolutely no physical evidence against him. The state wouldn't have been able to prove their case at trial, but thanks to coercive tactics, they didn't have to. If you grew suspicious of Henry Layer because he knew that the shotgun shells were in the chicken coop, you should know that several sources out there claim that Beata's brother is actually the one who pointed him in that direction. Layer's wife tried to reason with the police, providing an alibi for Henry's entire day. She could account for his every move, but little good came from it. The police weren't interested in anything that contradicted their story. An interesting tidbit of information I got from the Turtle Lake podcast is that Henry Layer's last name was actually pronounced Liar in the German-Russian dialect. As silly as it seems, this undoubtedly affected his reputation in English-speaking areas. A connotation came with the name, and many may have assumed the worst because of it. Later, with the help of legal counsel, Layer tried to revoke his plea and get a jury trial. The courts considered this, but ultimately declined his request for a trial on merit. Some historians think there's a possibility that Layer was covering up for someone. He kept uttering a German phrase that translates to, "My eyes have seen, but my hands are clean," indicating that he may have had some knowledge about what happened on that April morning. The case was closed. Politicians and law enforcement didn't care if Henry's story lined up with the forensic evidence or not. They just wanted to put someone away for the murder as fast as possible. Attorney William Langer won the Republican nomination, but lost the gubernatorial race. Some German Russians were won over in part by his tenacity in making sure that someone was put away for the massacre. Apparently it didn't matter too much if it was actually the guilty party. They just felt better having someone locked up. Other German Russians took issue with the fact that one of their own was locked up for the crime. He lost votes there. He won the seat in the election 12 years later, however, and was eventually elected to the United States Senate. The police were able to find the supposed killer and have him in prison just 3 weeks after the murders. They gave themselves a pat on the back for their speedy work. Henry Layer died just 5 years into his prison sentence. His family moved back to Turtle Lake after his death. After losing every single member of her immediate family in the massacre, Emma stayed with Jacob Hofer's parents, who fought for custody for the girl, even though some said they were unfit. By the time Emma was in high school, they couldn't care for her at all, and she was sent to live with a foster family. She eventually graduated from high school, married in 1940, and tried not to look back. She and her husband raised 3 children and were married for 63 years. Emma Wolf Hansen passed away in 2003 at the age of 74. As for Layer's family, they were torn apart by the events of that dark day in April of 1920. Henry and his wife divorced. She ended up sending 3 of their 4 children to be raised in an orphanage. One of their sons died when a farm wagon ran him over at the age of 6. The surviving children returned to the Turtle Lake area after their father's death, but were taunted and shunned because of their connection to the supposed murderer. The oldest daughter, Blanche, struggled with PTSD issues over the massacre until her death in 1981. This case has been suggested by quite a few subscribers, and until now I've been hesitant to make a video. There's already a lot of quality content on this case out there. My favorite video came from YouTuber Kaylee Elise several years ago, and I would definitely recommend watching it, but her videos have been harder and harder to find since she retired from YouTube. Christy Sky also has a video, and of course, you should check out the Turtle Lake podcast. Vernon Keel also has a book about the case, The Murdered Family. It is written as a novel and some parts are fictionalized, but it's interesting. If you want to go deeper down this rabbit hole, I'll have some more resources pasted in the video description. There are many accounts of this case on the internet. Some contradict each other. This case is 101 years old, and history gets passed down by the living. None of the Wolfs can account for what happened that day, so we'll never know exactly what went on. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the different tellings of this story, but I've tried to provide you with a comprehensive guide to everything I could find about the massacre. People still talk about this case because it's still on the minds of North Dakotans. Did they ever find the right man, or did the residents of Turtle Lake live the rest of their lives with a ruthless maniac roaming free? Only one building remains on the Wolf property, this tower that you can see in their funeral photograph. What do you think happened? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments. That's all for now. I'll see you next time on Out of the Past.